I'm giving the committee today a copy of the $130,000 wire transfer from me to Ms. Clifford's attorney that was demanded by Ms. Clifford to maintain her silence about her affair with Mr. Trump.
Long ago, bombshells have become criminal evidence. That was Michael Cohen explaining all this to Congress. He gave lawmakers the receipts, which became a big part of this week's case.
As Exhibit 5A to my testimony shows, I am providing a copy of a $35,000 check that President Trump personally signed from his personal bank account on August 1st of 2017, when he was President of the United States, pursuant to the cover-up, which was the basis of my guilty plea, to reimburse me, the word used by Mr. Trump's TV lawyer, for the illegal hush money I paid on his behalf. This $35,000 check was one of 11 check installments that was paid throughout the year while he was president.
We're joined now by the New York Times Magazine legal writer Emily Bazelon and a veteran of the Manhattan DA's office, Jeremy Saland. Welcome to both of you. Here we are, okay? I'm curious, Emily, what you think, having followed all the way back to when the story first broke and all these other trials that have been delayed. They're all basically all slated to go after the election. This is the one we have. And the week started with Michael Cohen giving a version of that set of events to the jury and ended with him, I would say, on defense over whether he's always truthful.
Yeah, I mean, that clip really shows how this is the saga of Michael Cohen and Donald Trump's relationship, which was this relationship that Cohen wanted to hold so close and so dear. It blew up on him. This hush money scheme, his own role in it and lying about it, sent him to prison. And now he's trying to bring Donald Trump into that scheme with him, of course, with the prosecutors behind him. And so this story that he's been telling, that he got in big trouble initially for lying about, then says that he told the truth about to Congress. Now there's supposed to be real consequences for Donald Trump, who Cohen casts as the principal. And then the question is, does he have enough credibility for the jury to believe that version of events so that he can pull Trump down with him, essentially?
Yeah, that's well put. And Jeremy, you have been inside that office. You've tried these kind of cases, and you also do defense work. So you're a great expert for us. I want to play a little bit of Cohen's history because there's so much talk about bias in the world. And that word, sometimes the idea that you're only doing something for your political views or something else. There's also information bias, right? We've all, who follow this, absorbed what Emily just referred to as this relationship saga. We don't have any reason to believe from voir dire that this jury has followed this very closely, and they're now instructed not to. So I was watching in the courtroom this week as they kind of got more and more detail about this very strange odyssey. And to them, it's new. It's newer information. Here's some of where Cohen started.
I know Mr. Trump. I've stood by him shoulder to shoulder for the past decade. I think he's a wonderful man. I'm obviously very loyal and very dedicated to Mr. Trump. I'll do anything to protect Mr. Trump, the family, now Vice President-elect Pence, as well as the campaign. I think he's going to be a great president. Mr. Trump has a significant number of people. I'd like to keep myself in that little circle of extremely loyal people.
Not exactly a resistance whistleblower. And so the prosecutors argued that version of Michael is why he did lie then and now is telling the truth. And the defense counsel argued, how are you going to trust this guy? His story keeps changing.
Sammy the Bull wasn't a good guy at day one, but he was loyal. And we know that Donald Trump loves loyalty, and he sort of supports, not sort of, in fact, provides for and calls in loyalty. At some point, when you turn your back on someone, if you believe the narrative, that person turns around and tells the story. But you're not getting the kingpin. You're not getting the big boss. You're not getting the major bad guy unless you have dirty hands. You want a choir boy? Then it goes nowhere. You need that person who's in that room as part of that crime or that bad act to get the main player you're seeking. And in this case, it's not Sammy the Bull, but it's Michael Cohen.
Yeah, Sammy the Bull helped get Gotti,
Absolutely.
as the saying goes. We've covered that recently.
Teflon until he wasn't Teflon.
Right. Did you see Sammy the Bull have the same recent credibility problems? Because we've heard from experts, including veterans of the office, just like you, that they did get some punches landed because there were real questions about whether Cohen has not just changed his story since he got in trouble, but been less than truthful recently.
There wasn't any, you have to look at this as not sort of that haymaker, down goes Frazier sock to knock him out. It's body blows, body blows, body blows. And I don't know if they landed enough because I think the prosecution did a good job humanizing him. And so far, to Michael Cohen's credit, he hasn't been the bombastic cut
Not at all. That's fair.
Cut from the same cloth as Donald Trump, but different, who would just go on these tirades as he has in his podcast. He's been respectful and calm, at times more so on day one than day two. He was a little evasive in his answering of questions. I don't recall, well, not that I don't recall, but it sounds right, it sounds correct. Today, he was much more yes and no, and if he didn't recall, he didn't recall. And again, going back to what I said before, at the end of the day, you're getting the bad guy because that's who has the information. And whether or not he wanted to become chief of staff and he told his daughter, whether or not he asked for a pardon before saying he didn't want a pardon, he's a regular guy at the end of the day who wants to be vindicated and doesn't want to go to prison. So none of this is a home run.
Right. And you think that checks out. Emily, there's so many lawyers in Trump's orbit who are in trouble. Cohen went to jail for him. Other aides went to jail pursuant to Mueller. Today, or I should say in the Thursday day, I was in court and saw Jeff Clark, who's a co-defendant in a wholly different case. I don't know why you want to bring a co-defendant from your other criminal problems into this courtroom, but there we are. Michael Avenatti clashed with Cohen and then was convicted of other crimes in this same orbit, and all the attention in television drew scrutiny to him. I was able to obtain his first jailhouse interview. I said then and repeat now that he was convicted for crimes related to lying. He has his own set of issues. But he was the person on the other side of this everyone remembers. And one thing he said from that prison interview was he thinks there's evidence to convict Trump. He expects Trump to be convicted. But he previewed what he said would be problems with Cohen, notwithstanding the fact that they've obviously clashed in the past. Take a listen.
Every case needs to have one or two primary witnesses who tell the story. From my perspective, I surmise that the DA is going to use potentially Michael Cohen or Stormy Daniels for that purpose. And I think that has the potential to be a disaster. Michael Cohen is and I've never been a fan of Michael for various reasons. He's a serial liar. He's shown himself to be incapable of telling the truth.
Emily?
Well, Michael Avenatti obviously has a problem with Michael Cohen, and you can see it there. One thing that I've been thinking about is the way in which Cohen's previous testimony in the civil trial involving the Trump organization gave him a chance to rehearse. We're seeing someone here who's much calmer in terms of demeanor, is holding it together on the stand. And we'll see if that's enough to convince the jury. I mean, he has weaknesses. He has done lying in the past. Whether he's now kind of atoning for that lying or making up for it by telling the part of the story that's true, I mean, that's what this tests. And, obviously, if you have a record of being convicted of perjury, you're automatically not the best witness. But the prosecution really tried to lay the groundwork for the idea that this isn't a great guy. They're relying on him for a key fact, for this idea that Trump knew about these checks, the fraud part of the case against him. And so, we're just going to have to see whether this is enough. And then also, what happens next? Does the defense put on witnesses? Who are they? How does this case build from here? And then how do we look back on Cohen's testimony when we have the whole shape of the trial?
Going backwards, forward, what does the defense case look like from here? I think after they hit their points with Michael Cohen, let's get him off the stand. And there's diminishing returns is a term I've used repeatedly. At some point, the jury loses interest when you keep on saying the same thing. And you lied about this, you lied about that, because the prosecution is saying he may have lied at time one, but that doesn't make him a liar.
And I promised you to let you also weigh in on something we led the hour with, which is this spectacle of politicians and members of the government undermining the rule of law, which is not normal, is unusual, and bears some some addressing. You said you wanted, as a former prosecutor, to speak on that.
Yeah, I mean, not as a former prosecutor, not even as a defense attorney, just as someone who believes in the criminal justice system, which is one of the foundations of our country, it is to say it's wholly inappropriate, to say it's wholly offensive and it's reprehensible is not doing it justice. It's a complete understatement. And these folks who are getting up there, I'm going to use a term that may offend people, and this has nothing to do with Donald Trump's absolute innocence until the courtroom, until if and when he's proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But when you talk about wanting to be loyal to get something, that's why they're there. This is a bunch of, here we go, bootlickers who are really obsessed with Donald Trump, who want nothing but to be his lapdog, because if Donald Trump wins, they'll get their little fiefdoms. And maybe that comes in the form of a vice presidency. Maybe that comes forming a good committee through working through the Speaker of the House. That's not what justice is about. Why the governor of one of the Dakotas is here in New York talking about a criminal trial in the state of New York, in New York City, is beyond me.
And undermining the rule of law.
100%. I mean, you want to talk about your neighbor to the south or north, whatever it may be, shooting her dog? Great, go ahead and do that. But don't come to New York and undermine justice.
Yeah.
You know, if there's a political issue here, I get that. Because
no, but I mentioned you being a prosecutor because I do think it brings extra heft, because we've seen, for example, in the federal system, this is a local case, there are precedents where they will throw out an entire military trial because the president said anything about it. In other words, this is supposed to be the tradition is you're going to follow what the jury says, period. And that's after the fact, let alone prejudging it.
I mean, by their theory, then, if we have a trial in Alabama, automatically, if it's a Republican prosecutor, it's a Democratic, candidate or elected official, it's bad. And I'll say this: most people here aren't maybe watching aren't from New York, but if you remember Alan Hevesi, he was a New York State Controller. He is not held to a higher, or was not held to a higher standard in the courtroom, but he was outside the courtroom, because we hold our elected officials to a higher standard, to more scrutiny. They should be treated equally in the courtroom, 100%. But when Donald Trump finds himself in this position, true or not, which is not because he has not been proven guilty, it's himself to blame to start this off.
Yeah, and I don't mean to sound old-fashioned, schoolhouse rock, civics, whatever, but something I've touched on with you and here in our discussion with Emily, we all have to understand these are members of the government. It has to be a different standard. We're talking about whether you support the government you're a part of, and we saw in the insurrection some of the soft minimization or even support for that. But if you have the calls coming from inside the House and members of the government won't uphold the judicial branch, then we're in a big problem regardless of the outcome of this case. Jeremy and Emily, thanks to both of you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. As for that MAGA parade,